hope you have a smile on your face for this episode of Turntables and Tea. I'm Charlie,
And I'm Cory.
and this week we have a special guest with us, Daniel Brilliant. He came here to discuss ABBA with us last year, and now he's back to discuss the Beach Boys and Smile, the legendary lost album and kinda found. We're gonna be discussing that today. Daniel, welcome back. We're happy to have you here.
Good to be back on. And, I feel like the death of Brian Wilson in the last couple months has everybody inspired to bring back the Beach Boys into discussions and, discuss their catalog. And this is a really great place to go with it, just because of all the history associated with this lost, as we said, and kind of found out.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty legendary. So there's a good chance you've heard of it if you clicked on this link. But in case you haven't, this was this was supposed to be the follow-up to the legendary Pet Sounds album. And it started off with what would have been the lead single, I suppose, is an iconic song in its own right, of course, Good Vibrations. But album never quite came to fruition. There was just a lot going on, to put it lightly, at this point in time, because Brian Wilson, creative genius, but that carries a burden with it, and he was feeling it a lot at this point in time.
It's an understatement of the millennia there. That is a genius. With great powers come great responsibility, and he felt that the most. I can relate to that, though. I can relate to that. I had a function this weekend where I ended up singing with my brothers, and it always ends up being a tense moment right before, because I don't like to do anything without a full perfection. But sometimes it takes family or other musicians just to smack you upside the head and be like, hey, come on, let's get it done. So it's good to see great music come to fruition always, but I can definitely relate to that perfectionist mindset.
Daniel, do you have anything you want to add?
I mean, I've just got a lot of context here because I'm a lifelong Beach Boys fan.
Yeah.
Like, from a very, very young age, I've listened to this band. They're a band that's kept my father and I's bond very strong. We used to play the Beach Boys' greatest hits on car rides. We saw the movie Love and Mercy together, the biopic about Brian Wilson. We watched the recent Disney Plus Beach Boys documentary together. So it's like probably my father and I's shared favorite band. So they're very, very special to me.
Very cool. Very cool. I feel like that goes, they're such in my opinion, they're such a wild band because they have so many ways that people take them. On the surface level, I feel like maybe I'm aging myself, but like Kokomo on Sesame Street is like a big version of the Beach Boys, this clean cut version of the Beach Boys that I think on the surface level everybody sees, but there's so much more to these beautiful musicians that span generations. I'm happy to hear that music can be a linchpin in a relationship, especially between a father and a son. But these guys, they offer it up for us to consume.
Yeah, lots of content.
Yeah, I mean, still, this is the perfect vessel for that. We're looking at archival footage, recordings of spanning 6 years, 65 to 71. So there's definitely a lot of work here. I love it. They're such an in-depth band. There's so much to say about them. This could go on for a long time, this podcast tonight.
It just might. Who knows? It just might, but that's okay. That is A-okay. So, as I said, this was supposed to be the follow-up to the legendary Pet Sounds album, which, even though it's now regarded as the Beach Boys' masterwork, it wasn't actually quite as big of a hit as you might have imagined. Like, it had hits, but not quite as big as some of the hits that came before, even though now, of course, some of those, well, no, almost all of the songs are rightfully regarded as classics. That album itself has so much lore to it, and there was kind of a bit of an artistic rivalry that Brian Wilson felt with the Fab Four themselves, the Beatles. Kind of like it's like, I want to outdo Rubber Soul, so I'm going to do Pet Sounds. And then not long after we got Revolver, and I get this was in a way Brian's response to it, but of course it's a bit more of that because it's very much his vision and view on the world. And he brought in a new collaborator named Van Dyke Parks, a well-known songwriter in his own right. If you do want to hear what they have to say about it, there's a documentary on Smile on YouTube. Highly recommend. It's from like 2004 when Brian himself redid the album, but it's pretty interesting to hear all the different perspectives at that time.
It's also interesting to know that, like, if anyone's not aware of the Beach Boys' history, this was around when Brian stopped touring with the band and focused much more on studio work, because a lot of the backing tracks during this period, starting with their album The Beach Boys Today, included a boatload of session musicians called The Wrecking Crew, who also have their own documentary that is available to stream, and just basically everything from Today up until the Smile Project got more and more ambitious.
Yeah, sounds pretty similar to the Beatles, who also stopped touring in 1966.
I mean, the Wrecking Crew, we could do a whole podcast on just those guys, period. To have that amount of talent just sitting in and doing stuff. I mean, that went all the way over to Sonny and Cher. I'm not going to list everybody that the Wrecking Crew worked with, but such great talent, sitting in with an already full-on powerhouse of musical talent as well. It's unique. It's stuff that you don't see anymore. Even when, or I shouldn't say anymore, but it's stuff you don't see in widespread circulation these days, in my opinion. So it's such a cool microcosm of the whole entire music industry inside of even just the Wrecking Crew guys,
Well, I would agree. A lot of people don't play instruments anymore, sadly. But there's that, but I digress. These people are playing them. This one was, even if Pet Sounds was considered a bit odd, this was considered even more avant-garde. Brian was doing his thing, but it was not well received by everybody. It was like, this is maybe too weird. And, I mean, in the 60s, I can kind of see where that's coming from. Even today, this is definitely a unique album. I haven't heard anything quite like it, and it's not full of obvious summertime hits like you might expect. Like, even Pet Sounds has Wouldn't It Be Nice? This really, until the end, doesn't really have that. So it is a bit more out there, but that's not to say it's not beautiful. But they were taking their time with it, their damn time with it, because Brian just had to be perfect. There were also record label issues, I should say, with Capitol Records, because they have issues today, Capitol Records. I'm afraid that hasn't changed very much. And as it kept going, long story short, Brian was just really mentally declining, and he was losing his fight, and they were prepared to get it all done by like 1967. He was getting there, but then the project was canceled, and by that point, the Beatles had put out Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and well, the rest was history there, obviously. Kinda a war, and I mean, it's Sgt. Pepper's, man. It's a hard one to beat, but that doesn't mean this isn't worthy, and it just became this kind of... I mean, some of these songs were put onto the next album, Smiley Smile, which has a cult following all its own. I found out over this, but not as commercially successful. And over here, the myth of Smile, the great lost album, just came to be.
What's crazy is actually there were songs from Smile on several albums following Smiley Smile, including on Wild Honey, on 2020, on Sunflower, and on Surf's Up. There were remnants of this album that lasted all the way to 1971, which is like a very long tale for a lost album, especially considering they just did not throw away these songs. They repurposed them, they re-recorded aspects of them, and they put them out. A lot of them, especially the big centerpiece songs, which we'll discuss.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, which not every song actually is really a full song, but it does tell part of a story, but we'll get to that, of course.
Yeah, it's really awesome to get all of this, in my opinion, to get all of this music here in one package and really get a great look at the building blocks of the sound in this 6-year span, or in their history period. There's so much. It was so fun for me as a musician and as a fan of music to sit here and pick through this stuff and be like, wait a minute, isn't that used here? Or wait a minute, is that the basis for this? There's so much in here that is wild. I have so many notes of what I think inspired, or where I think different things went, that I found I was totally wrong about, or also, right on the button. But there's a lot of sounds here. I mean, we talked about the Wrecking Crew, but still there's a lot of sounds here that for me spanned a couple different artists, if not almost a whole complete genre for a good, say, close to 10 years after this. So it's a really unique collection here that I had such a great time going through.
You could almost say this is a very early progressive rock album in a lot of ways, because it's almost, I mean, it is arranged like a symphony in a way that not many pop albums are. There's movements, there's leitmotifs, there's repeated melodies, there's reprises. It's very classically composed. And, like, Pet Sounds obviously has elements of that in the instrumental songs on the album and the way that the songs are organized, but not even to the level of this one.
Yeah, and that was so unique for an album at this time, because we haven't done a ton of albums from the 60s, and there are obvious classics, of course, but part of it is because labels were so focused on the singles. Like, I learned that a lot doing, like, Sonny and Cher research, for instance. Like, it was such a focus on singles. We need to get a product out. A lot of other songs would be covers on so many of these early albums, including for the Beach Boys at first, but Brian was one of the artists who wanted to move past that and really make the album an art form. And this is an example of that. And I mean, for some, it obviously was too ambitious, but I think part of that was just they weren't quite used to an album with movements yet. We just were not. He was ahead of his time for sure in that regard. And mad respect for that, because that's part of why we can do a podcast like this today, because of an innovator like that.
Yeah, I mean, when you got Van Dyke Parks with you on it, there's bound to be that orchestral role. But I mean, I love the Rolling Stone quote, and I'll paraphrase, but even though Wilson didn't necessarily find it, there is one of the greatest pop albums of all time hidden in here somewhere. And I 100% agree with that as far as sound goes. It really is. Man, I should have jotted it down, but there's a Henry Rollins quote. Basically, he was over the moon on this, which is it's so unique to see how this music touches artists from all types of different genres. I love it.
It does. And now that we've been going on about this, I do want to specify exactly what version we're discussing of this today, because there have, of course, been many bootlegs over the years, and in 2004, Brian Wilson presented his own version of the album. It's Brian Wilson Presents Smile. He toured it. Again, look up that YouTube documentary if you want to hear about that, because that focuses a lot on that recreation, which is fun to see, because you really do get to actually see the footage of him working on it and performing it. So if you have any interest in this, check that out. But even then, the story of Smile was not over, because in 2011, a box set called The Smile Sessions was released, and there was already a Pet Sounds Sessions box set release, it did show that for the Beach Boys, people were interested in hearing demos and fragments of tracks because they just wanted to know it. Even for songs that did exist, there was a clamoring for this unreleased material of sorts. And so this was a huge box set released in 2011, but the first 19 tracks are considered a construction of the album, and it's not necessarily what we would have gotten in 1967. Brian Wilson said that at the time, but it was how he saw these songs in 2011 and about as close as we're going to get. So that is the track list we're going by. That's the track list that we are going by as we discuss Smile today.
Yeah, it's definitely not the version we would have got. I'll go out on a limb and say, and Daniel, I'd like to know if you agree. I don't think Wilson could have released this back then in good faith under the perfectionist, or even just the way he was recording back then. I'm trying to dance around this so much because we're not going to get to Good Vibrations till the end, but Good Vibration is such a great example that his recording style on Good Vibrations is such a great example of why we get all these sounds. But do you think he could have released this back in the day and been happy with it?
No, I do not, especially because, he felt like the Beatles kind of beat him at his own game with Sgt. Pepper, and by the time that came out, and specifically also the Strawberry Fields Forever Penny Lane single, he felt like what he was doing on Smile had just been beaten by the Beatles in their own way. But, I mean, he basically invented an entire new technique of recording when making Good Vibrations that was the basis for the album, and we'll discuss that further. And it was so advanced that I don't think he could have fully realized it in the state he was in.
I have these awesome visions of him doing it and like literally cutting tape and tossing it around and 8-tracking his way through, and I'm so enthralled by his mad genius throughout that process. It really is such a unique and awesome tale.
Yeah, and I have a hard time seeing this released in the 60s. Like, if it were to have been, it would have been with serious label interference and intervention, and I think that would have gotten in the way, regardless of how Brian was at the time, because the Beatles had people supporting their vision. Their manager wasn't their dad. They had Brian Epstein, and he was a shark. Like, they had people wanting to push the vision forward more so, and that were just more on their side, and the Beach Boys, unfortunately, didn't quite have that. And the tensions that kind of broke the band as we know it they were simmering with the Beatles too, but they were more at the forefront with the Beach Boys because they were just more there to begin with, because that's what happens when Murray Wilson's your manager and it's a family band. It's a totally different dynamic. So I don't think we would have gotten it because the machine does not always want to support the vision. And this is an example of that. It just would have ended up being, for lack of a better word, bastardized. But he got his because Brian Wilson did not go away. He had a second and third act. Like, he did not just succumb like so many other great stars. Because, we could be telling a different tale. All of this could have ended differently, and what we could be saying, Brian Wilson was part of the 27 Club, but fortunately that didn't happen. There was a lot more in him and his legend, because when you make something that people want to hear, it will come back, and this is a great example of that. There's such a redemption arc to this whole story that makes me invested in it and that I enjoy discussing it. With that being said, I think we are ready to go into this Smile as we know it as of 2011, tracks 1 through 19. Are we ready?
Let's get at it.
Let's go. Alright, so this album begins with Our Prayer, very vocal harmony heavy. I think how I want to do this, I think I want to start with Daniel, because you are our Beach Boys expert, then go to Cory, then go to me. I think that would be a good way to do this because you're a wealth of knowledge about this band. You know a lot more than I do. So I'm gonna let you go.
I think Our Prayer is a real. Just the way it sounds is a real entryway into this era of Beach Boys, because I think maybe no group ever had harmonies this good at this point in time. And it's basically a chorale, this song. And it was initially released on their album 2020. It did come out, and near identical form, but it's much more interesting, in my opinion, as an intro to an album because it's so mysterious, spiritual, and just beautiful in general. Just hearing the familiar harmonies of the Beach Boys used in a classical style, but also with a sense of wonder. Even in a minute and 7 seconds, it conveys all of that.
I mean, I'm with you. It's wild that just the title alone, Our Prayer, not only lends itself automatically with the music, but I feel like without the title itself, I would name it that, as corny as that might sound, because it really lends itself so much to that spiritual sense. The harmonies between those boys is immaculate. No pun intended, to the prayer that we have here, and it's such a neat way to lead off. Even in these sessions where they weren't sure if they wanted to stick with the way that it was constructed in 2004, I think it's a great service, and it would have been a great misstep, in my opinion, not to follow that same sort of structure, because this is such a really neat way to open it up and really in its time set itself, again, in my opinion, set itself apart from such a lyrically heavy album that Pet Sounds was. And so now you're in a new place, and it's automatically represented here in such a neat way. And it really seamlessly flows into the next one. And I know they were used together, I believe, in the 2004 release. They were the same track, but such a neat start to this.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's another way. I mean, this is a completely different parallel. It's like almost, even though this wasn't released as it would have been until many years later, I feel like you hear this influence of this. Like, we have the prayer spirituality to start an album, because you mentioned that. I think of Madonna, Like a Prayer, starts the album, ends with Act of Contrition. And even though, like, this wasn't released officially, there is a lineage there, and that's just what I think of. I'm sure there are plenty of other examples, because, prayer, religion, it's all over popular music. That's why I love popular music, because it relates to everything. I'll be right back. I really need some water, but then we'll continue. I'll be very quick.
You're good. I'll be 1 second myself then. With the risk of sounding morbid, and I don't know if I would include this in the podcast, but I would hope that Our Prayer was used in some form in his funeral, because it speaks so beautifully to that just normal the hymnal version of what I love with religious melodies. But I don't know if that'll be taken as well as it would just between me and you.
Yeah. I mean, it also like reminds me a bit of what Elton John did with Funeral for a Friend a few years later.
Heard. Yeah,
Because
that's true.
Funeral for a Friend was what he said he hopes is played at his own funeral, and I would assume Brian thought the same thing about Our Prayer.
I'm with you.
Yeah, crazy to think about. But the funny thing is, Our Prayer, like Funeral for a Friend, kind of goes right into another track. This one is... Alright. And this next track is called G-E-E. Daniel, how do you feel this continues the story of the album, so to say?
Well, this is a bit of a cover of a doo-wop song originated by a band called The Crows, and what it does on this album is it kind of, in my opinion, starts this trend of Americana that rolls throughout the album in taking various American musical styles and blending them with the Beach Boys style of the time, some psychedelia, and maybe even some classical elements. I would actually compare a lot of this album to the work of Aaron Copland, which is a bit of a strange comparison for a pop act, but Aaron Copland was like a very well-known classical composer who added Americana to his works, and I would say the mixture of Our Prayer and G to open the album does that. And I really like how both of these actually lead into our first centerpiece song, which I want to get into detail on because that's one of my all-time favorite songs. But we will discuss that in a second. But I just like that we're going with the spiritual, but then also tracing the lineage of the spiritual into the genre of doo-wop and the infusion of Americana and American sounds throughout this album.
Yeah, and I think rightfully so. I'm 100% an advocate for that, for this original dip into the doo-wop, for lack of better words. But I'm almost repeating everything you said in my respect for this second track, or this little piece that was included with, or synced up with Our Prayer. It does so much. I love that the psychedelia here, and it really, it's tough to not talk about our next track. I'm with you during it, but the psychedelic, even in G, is real super nostalgic to me, because I'm almost sitting on Yellow Submarine. I'm almost sitting on Peppers, and I'm trying not to do that throughout this album while we talk, but it's almost impossible, especially with the use of horns, and the use of these beautiful naked harmonies. It's such a unique thing. We think, sometimes you think psychedelic, and you're going out on synthesizers and sitars and things like that, but the way they incorporate Americana inside of it here is it's really a linchpin. Hot tea take, or my opinion, period. It's really the linchpin for what we see for years to come out of multiple artists. So such a cool piece here.
Yeah, the Americana is something that has not left music. I mean, in terms of modern artists, I think we get the first person I think of in terms of putting that in their stuff today is Lana Del Rey, who we discussed here before. But yeah, I'm also excited to discuss the next track, which is definitely a centerpiece. Heroes and Villains, a legendary song. And the first one that's not just the whole group singing themselves, but they all get their own parts. So this one, yeah, first two tracks very brief. This one's a full tune, almost 5 minutes. I'm excited to discuss it. I'm gonna let you start, Daniel, because you said it's one of your favorites.
This song is it's something special. It's almost a miniature suite in and of itself. It's got movements, it's got changes in tempo and key. It's got, I mean, this version is different than the known version that came out beforehand because it's got an additional section to it. But it almost feels like you're living a spaghetti western in miniature, in my opinion. And like you've like obviously like the subject of the song is, you're in the old west, you're dealing with the good guys and the bad guys, and it's like I don't know, this song just makes me grin every time I hear it. The orchestral elements of this song are incredible. It's such complex music. I love how this song in particular is the source of most of the album's leitmotifs. If you don't know what a leitmotif is, it's a repeating bit of music, and a lot of the elements of this song come back up in several songs, including the next track and many others, but I think this song is the key to this album, and without this song, this album wouldn't work. I want to hear more of what you guys have to say about that.
I'll jump right in on that opinion there. It is a leitmotif, but you don't have this album without this song. And the cool thing is, it grows off prayers in G, and we fit seamlessly into this linchpin, this big piece of the puzzle here. And I'm 100% with you. We don't get it. I can never unsee the animated music video for this, and you know, in the vein of the old Yellow Submarine and the point and those animated features, it really lends itself to being animated, period, but just lends itself to us by telling this beautiful story, this narrative that we can immediately follow without having to try too hard, but then also without trying be taken on this musical journey here. We go from full on orchestration to stripped down single vocals inside of this 5-minute stretch, and it never falters to the point of even a millisecond of not listening. I'll go out on a limb and say it's impossible not to subconsciously listen to this whole song, because it's so well orchestrated and well produced. You know, I say I mentioned the point here, but it's one of the ones that I have in my notes. Even without seeing the animation, this is the groundwork for so much, I'll say, of my childhood listening, but like so much of what we saw afterwards. I'll even go out on a limb and say I hear and see a lot of Nielsen Schmielsen here. Like there's so much inspiration, I think, that has been taken from this, but such an epic tune. And to finish off with this almost, I love the spaghetti western thought here, but you know, you leave with this almost like early TV sound on the way out. And we get that western, that Wild West sound. I love this song.
So this song is actually really hard to do the album without this, because this was the first collaboration between Wilson and Van Dyke Parks, and he just kept reworking it, Brian. Like, this was the example of, like, the perfection just was not enough for him. He had to keep going at it, but he was telling the story here, a complex one. So it's not surprising why he had to keep going at it. And this was one of the tunes included on Smiley Smile, and it was a single, underperformed. It made it to number 12, which was not ideal for a Beach Boys who, at this point, they'd had 3 number 1 hits. They were used to being higher up than that. More was expected, but at the time, that reception wasn't the greatest. Like, some folks like Jimi Hendrix referred
Yeah.
to it as psychedelic barbershop quartet, which is, but then again, that isn't the version that we're getting here. That was an example of the Machine, Capitol Records, coming in and tinkering with things. This was not the vision as intended, and now we got it here. And I don't see this necessarily as a hit song, but that's not a bad thing, because it's still a good song. And it's telling a story and pushing the boundaries of what pop music can be. And I don't think this works as a pop song in the way of other Beach Boys tunes that are also complex, but it's still an important one. And one of my favorite moments in watching that '04 documentary was seeing Brian Wilson get to perform it in 2001, and just him seeing the response to it showed that people really cared about this music that he was putting out during this time, and there was still so much interest in it almost 40 years later. And now, farther along, it's almost 60 years later, we're still talking about it and listening today, which I think is a testament to genius. So, yeah, very hard to imagine this album without the song, and we shouldn't. It's an essential Beach Boys track, not a hot tea take. Pretty hard to argue that point.
It's wild for us to sit here and say so many good things about it, and then on the flip side of that coin, think that this was such a detrimental point for Brian Wilson. It's just such a in retrospect, the start of the decline, quote unquote. Not my words. I'm paraphrasing, but it's wild to see Jimmy say that about the barbershop. And I know that it was in a negative connotation is wild too, because the first time I read it, I chuckled and said that's exactly what it is. Not so much strict barbershop, but just I can see where he's coming from. I'm surprised, not in a negative way, but surprised to hear you say that you don't hear a hit here, because this for me stands in the same vein almost as like scenes from an Italian restaurant, where it's a good long epic. We're gonna do musical stylings throughout and tell a strict story. It's a cool one, man.
Well, I kind of want to talk about the cantina section, because that section is what was reintroduced on this version of the song that was not on the single version of the album or the Smiley Smile version. And I think, just it adds to that Old West feeling of the song. It almost makes you in a crazy way, it makes you think of something that didn't come out for 10 years. It makes you think a bit of Star Wars and that section of that movie. But again, it's kind of like Star Wars in that it's taking, an old style and modernizing it for that age.
That's a really good point. I love to look at it that way. Very cool.
Of course you do. Of course he does.
Yeah, I forget that the Star Wars stuff is behind me in our video here. So,
but
whether you were playing to the crowd or not on that one, I still dig that thought process.
Yeah, that's always one of those things comes up here. But Cory, I love what you said about it's crazy this came out at that mental decline, because can't help but remind me of another favorite tortured genius of mine, Britney Spears, putting out Blackout in 2007, her best album. But that's all I'll say about that. I know that's completely different.
That's the perfectionist music mindset, in my opinion. Where you're at the top of your mountain, so to speak, and to listeners, and you're spiraling the opposite way. The plight of the musical genius.
Yes, and now we're gonna keep it going with the next track. Do You Like Worms? Roll Plymouth Rock is the parenthetical title. I'm sorry, I'm very tired today. I'm doing my best here, folks, but it's another one about colonization, and very similar to the previous song. In fact, elements of it were used into Heroes and Villains. But this is still a unique track in its own right. So, Daniel, what do you think of this one?
I really love that introductory keyboard sound and the way they use a harpsichord melody for the bicycle rider section of this. And it's another leitmotif that comes up throughout the album, and you're repeating melodies from Heroes and Villains, but also iterating on them, and hearing insane vocal harmonies, and the Beach Boys are just, again, doing what I said in a similar way to Aaron Copland. They're taking pieces of Americana, they're iterating on them, they're making them into pieces of modern music, and just infusing their own touch on it. And that's part of what this song is as well. It's not necessarily, it's a 3-minute 35-second song, but I would say it's not necessarily a complete song, but it's a very good piece of the album.
It for me, and I touched on a little bit early on, but we're still, even though we're getting our fully fledged songs here, inside of this session's recording, for me, I hear a lot of the stuff that we'll get. Good Vibrations is in here again, and we hear the same or a similar melody that we're going to end up using in, or that we ended up using in Heroes and Villains. But this awesome thought, this musical thought that is being picked apart, played with, tossed around, perfected. It stands throughout this album, and I think that's what makes it so unique, and so enthralling to pick apart in a critical sense, but more so, like I said earlier, as just a fan of music, period. There's so much orchestration throughout this album, especially here in Do You Like Worms, that we're going to use. And it's so unique to see a full song on an album, but also using pieces or even just in a new age word here, giving us little Easter eggs into what we're going to experience later on. It's a very, very cool piece. A huge fan. I'm right with you, Daniel. I'm a huge fan of the harpsichord in this. It's really well done, really well done. And a lot of these sounds for me in a later age, in a year 2025 or even in a year 1999, are sounds that I automatically equate with the Beach Boys because they used them so powerfully and so perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, again, it seems so redundant to say, but this really was immaculately produced, which is not surprising because we're talking about mid to late 60s Beach Boys. I mean, of course it's going to be, but I'm still enthralled by it and hear something new in these songs each time I pick them up, which is a feat for something that we did so long ago. And, well, we've got a lot more to go, so I'm going to keep it going here with the next track, which is I'm in Great Shape, which is more of a interlude piece, but doesn't mean it's not part of what we're doing here. So, Daniel, how do you think this adds to the picture?
I kind of want to talk about the next 3 tracks in tandem because I feel like they're kind of a singular piece.
That makes sense to me, actually.
So I'm in Great Shape is Brian kind of, adding a bit of a piece about exercise and staying fit. And then we segues into this little bit called Barnyard, which, I mean, honestly, very much evokes the sound of a farm, and you even hear animal noises on it. And I think it's a very cool sounding little bit. It's not a finished song, but I kind of like, the segues we're getting, like elements of Americana. I'm in Great Shape kind of makes you think of a circus strongman. Barnyard kind of makes you think of a petting zoo or a county fair. And then you go into something very familiar, which is a medley of 2 standards, The Old Master Painter and You Are My Sunshine, in the track My Only Sunshine. Although this is a very different take on those songs. It's a bit more minor key, and I think it's maybe playing on, I don't know what was going on here in Brian's mind, but I think it's kind of playing a bit on nostalgia and like memories of childhood, especially in the fact that it's a combination of 2 standards. And I really find the musical elements of this track fascinating, especially the outro where you get another repeat of the Heroes and Villains medley, but with very complex orchestration and harmonies. And I like this little section because I feel like it summarizes a lot of the connective tissue of the album in the way it connects various aspects of Americana nostalgia and orchestration.
Yeah, I think it's a great choice to do these 3 together because I challenge a blindfolded listener to tell me where each begins and where each ends, and I love that. But to stick with what you ended with this perfect Americana, for me, it is the mountaintop of this thought inside of My Only Sunshine. You get the old master painter and You Are My Sunshine melded and done, like you said, in this minor way, in this really orchestrated way, and then in the middle, where subconscious listener is hit with this awesome, nostalgic, if you will, clarinet doing the Gershwin rundown from Rhapsody in Blue. The in so many notes, and it's really striking. It's really striking. I will say, sounds like these really, really well orchestrated genius is not what I would have equated with the Beach Boys growing up and knowing them again, from Kokomo or just, you know, the bevy of surf tunes and upbeat stuff that is relevant in pop culture, or is prevalent, I should say, in our look at the Beach Boys in pop culture. But this ends up being a trio of really awesome orchestration, in the very least. You know, ultimately being the penultimate movement before we leave this man. I'm overusing my words here, but I couldn't help it. The penultimate movement for the first movement one of this record.
Yeah, and I agree it was smart. I mean, the main reason I was able to think of these songs even individually is because of streaming, but when I'm like listening to it, I'm not looking at my phone as I was listening to it, but it's like, yeah, I just kind of get lost in it because it just all flows together so beautifully. Um, the one of these that did stick out to me though was My Only Sunshine. I think it's brilliant how they did these standards, and I love that we got some Dennis Wilson vocals on My Only Sunshine, because the Beach Boys are a band. It's not just Brian Wilson's mouthpiece. And I like that Cory brings up Kokomo, because that song, a big part of that song's reputation, which is not the best, it's because of Smile and Pet Sounds that people hate on Kokomo, is a big part of it, because it's like, it's just not up to that Beach Boys standard, so to say. There's no Brian Wilson involved with that, which is well, that's its own thing. But yes, this first movement actually ends with the next track, which is Cabin Essence, which is primarily sung by Carl Wilson, which is fantastic because he was the group's best vocalist. Just such a beautiful voice right there. And this ended up being used again on 2020, that album, but you know, we are back into this Americana theme and we're getting to hear it as it was intended. So I'm looking forward to hearing what we all have to come to on this one. So Daniel, what do you think?
This song is one that I feel like unfolds new every time you hear it, just because there's such layered vocal melodies on here, and also again, I mentioned with Barnyard, it takes you back to the barn. This really makes you think about like doing farm work and then maybe having a revelation about life while you're doing farm work. And like I could almost equate it to the Wizard of Oz in some ways, because you're on the farm and then you get to the chorus and you're caught up in a tornado. Because you hear the swirling vocals, you hear the layered melodies and the orchestration, and it's again, it's very I think it's very profound. I think Carl sings it incredibly well. And I do think it's funny that like you do have other bits of Americana in here, like Who Ran the Iron Horse? Um uh Over and over the crow cries over and over the crow cries uncover the cornfield. Like these are very abstract thoughts, but also Americana thoughts in ways that I think the Wizard of Oz says similar things. So I think, I don't know why, but this song makes me think of that in the way it portrays Americana.
Yeah, I it's hard not to have these feelings and have these thoughts jump in your head on this one, because it really is such a true, beautifully orchestrated Americana piece. I mean, you get banjo here, you get harmonica, you get all types of different Americana instruments dabbled inside. in this cabin essence, in this last thought of our first movement here. And it really encapsulates, I was talking about building blocks, but it really encapsulates everything we've heard so far and really gives it a vessel, so to speak, inside an Americana vessel, so to speak, inside of this last thought process, this last piece of the movement here. I will say, in the vein of the title, for me, the essence here is not only of a cabin, but more so of the Beach Boys themselves. There is so much, again, in here that we're going to hear, especially in Good Vibrations, almost sonically and tonally exact, too. So there's these beautiful foreshadowing musical movements or musical thoughts throughout that we've seen already that are integral to the essence of the Beach Boys. So I really dig this song. I really dig it on its own, but also as this bow on this package here at the end of the first movement. A really mind-blowing opus here.
Yeah, that it is. And I'm gonna have to re-listen to this, and with what Daniel, what you said about the Wizard of Oz, that's definitely gonna make me listen to this song in a new way, because I had not thought of that. But there's a good chance he was inspired by that story and film, because it's the Wizard of Oz, and what's not to love there? What's not to be inspired by? Because there's just so much going on there.
I also want to bring up the fact that it's also partially inspired by the building of railroads, and you can also hear on the chorus what sounds like a train motor. And I think it's the way they arrange the percussion and the way they arrange the orchestration, but it does sound like a moving train.
I like that. I didn't pick that up, but that's the beauty of these. Like, I've listened to this album over 20 times in preparation here, and there's always something new to pick up and share. I've been talking so much with different musicians in my life throughout this last week, just nitpicking these sounds. I mean, like, do you ever hear this? What do you think about this? It's such a cool experience.
Yes, Smile is definitely an experience, and we're about to get on to Movement 2 of this album, which begins with the song Wonderful. Only real love song on the album, we could say, so it sticks out in terms of that, but it's got a lot of religious imagery going on as well, and this is one of the ones that ended up on Smiley Smile. Daniel, take it away.
What's interesting is the version you have here is very different than the version you have on Smiley Smile. What we haven't mentioned is a lot of Smiley Smile is basically this album deconstructed. And that album is very lo-fi, whereas this is incredibly hi-fi and highly produced. So the version of Wonderful you get on Smiley Smile is basically just vocal and organ, whereas this has harpsichord, harmonies, trumpet, and just sounds very classically composed, whereas the version of Wonderful on Smiley Smile almost sounds like this song's sad cousin, in a way. But this song is very, very beautiful, and I absolutely love the brass on this song. The brass always sticks out to me on this song, and kind of adds to the wistfulness of this song, in how Brian sings about a love, a sweet girl, and it's basically about how a girl discovers love, and it changes her world, and I think that's a beautiful sentiment. And I think the way it's recorded on this version of the album is much more fitting than the Smiley Smile version of this song.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm 100% with you there. I love that we get this, not to sound like a broken record, but I love that we get this, and I'm happy that we got it when we did, because again, we talked about it earlier, but I don't think that it wasn't released the way that we get it here, and I don't think it would have been even back then. It is a beautiful reset for me, or I like to think everyone as a subconscious listener on this album here, without having to think at all, you are switched into a different place. You know, a fitting start for the second movement, but even without knowing that we are in a second movement here, you're already reset, and you're inside of a beautiful love story, a coming of age story. From front to back. It's a neat one. There's so much finite orchestration here. Hey, this is my hot tea take for this track. There's so much finite orchestration here that it steps on the line of being too much, but it's not. But it's very close, and I guess that could be said for a lot of Wilson's work, especially on this album. But it's so perfectly balanced in this interpretation, or this version of it, that I can't help but listen to it over and over and over again. I enjoy this one.
So, yes, I agree that this version is more fitting. I'm glad that it's in the form we hear it here, because this isn't a lo-fi song lyrically. It's a love song, and that's when we gotta bring it all out. So I'm glad that we got to hear it in this lovely lo-fi form. I mean, not lo-fi, I'm sorry, in this lovely hi-fi classical baroque form that we got to hear it in, because this is how it should be, not as a sad cousin, because this is a very pretty tune in its own right, and it saddens me that had to be deconstructed because things happened, but that is how it goes sometimes. And now we are on to Look, Song for Children. This was an incomplete song of sorts, but we do have it here, and it's it's 2.5 minutes still, so we've got something to go on with here. And yeah, let's go with it. Daniel, what do you think?
I think what's interesting is you hear elements on this song of two upcoming centerpiece songs on the album, which are Surf's Up and Good Vibrations, which obviously we'll get more into. But it's, again, it adds to how this album flows. These next two tracks almost feel like a lead up to Surf's Up, and in a way, it adds to the impact of that song because you're getting the moods of that song in sound and in style, but not getting the whole song until you get to it. And I do love the way the muted trumpet sounds on here. I love the use of the harpsichord, and I love that, we get that that we're going to get at the very end of the album here, and we don't really hear it again until the end. So, I like that we're, in the middle of the album, but we're getting hints at what's to come. And that's what I like about this track and the next track, which we'll get to. But that's I think they serve their purpose. They're not highlights of the album per se, but they're very good transitional tracks.
I fucking love this song. I didn't know that it was incomplete the first time I heard it. Maybe it lends itself to my jam, my love of the jam music, or the jam scene, but the vocal piece in the beginning of this, the child is the father of the man, is such a unique, beautiful piece. For everyone, you can't see, but hopefully you can hear, I'm ear to ear smiles talking about this one. There's so much beautiful, unique musicality to this unfinished, I'm air quoting that, unfinished piece. There's genius inside of here. And again, I'm glad you said it, Daniel, because we had touched on it earlier, but we're getting these awesome Easter eggs, and in this one they're really in front of our face. It's definitely the lead up to what is to come, but more so right on the nose with the ba-da-da-da-da. We really get through that. This is up there for me on this album, and I guess that's weird with you guys saying transitional track, but I, even though this is considered incomplete, I just, Fish, if you're listening, I want to see a little jam piece on this. I really do. I enjoy the way that this is structured and rolls.
You want to hear Fish present Smile, don't you?
Halloween would be a sick. That would be a really really neat Halloween if they were to do this. I could see it happening. There's so much beautiful piano. I'm pushing for it now. I didn't think about it till this moment.
I know how your brain works too well at this point. You want Fish present Smile.
That would be sick. That would be sick.
I have to agree with Diego. I think this is more of a transitional track, and so is the next one. But these transitional tracks are still beautifully done, and I'm never once taken out of this album. I mean, there are multiple times lately when we've been doing this, like, this song kind of takes me out of the album a bit. That is not a thing on Smile. I am fully invested in this world the whole entire time, so... But yeah, it's a pretty transitional track. It's not, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's filler, but we do have these centerpiece songs that just take up so much of it. And that is something different for me in terms of how this album was done, because they very clearly want to tell you what the centerpieces that they want you to focus on the most are. Something I find pretty neat here. Because we are getting to one of them, but we're not there yet, because next up we've got Child is Father of the Man. Talking about that youth here. Daniel, take it away.
Again, this is more of a bit of a little transitional piece, but we get more beautiful orchestration. We get the little hint of the melody that we're going to hear on the next track, which I really want to go deep on the next track, so I'm not going to say too much here, but I think it's, I mean, in the way that I think Song for Children is a great, like, view into things to come, I think Child is the Father of the Man is a great intro into maybe the central song of the album, which we'll get to.
Yeah, and kudos for you guys not smacking me upside my head while I was going on my rant there, because I was so excited to talk about Child is the Father of the Man that even though I was saying some things about, look, all those feelings come for Child is the Father of the Man here. Look, definitely I can see where you guys were at on it being transitional, but then again, I really do stand behind loving the orchestration there. But yes, all that ranting and raving I just did foolishly ahead of time is for Child is the Father of the Man. It's such a beautiful piece. I feel so silly jumping the gun there, because I'm trying to stay with the whole run with my notes here, and I got ahead, but I can't tell you, or I guess I already have told you how much I enjoy that tune. It's such a well done piece. The start of it is the hook on Child is Father of the Man is one of my favorite pieces on this album. But it's that beautiful lead up again here in this second movement, in this 3-4 song second movement here, that'll will end up with the next one. So the build up here is amazing. And yep, I'm going to stop feeling foolish now, but my apologies for jumping the gun on Child is the Father of the Man.
Well, it is a neat one, and the boys saw something in it as well, because the chorus was rewritten and re-recorded for the song Little Bird from the Friends album from 1968, and we'll talk about, this song also made its way a few years later into that version of the next track, which is one of the centerpieces that we need to discuss, which is Surf's Up. Did get released in 1971, so as Daniel said, songs continued to linger in the band's repertoire for several years to come and keep it going. But it was intended for Smile, and we've got it here in 1966. So, yeah, we do want to go deep on this one. I'm going to start with Daniel, but I'm sure we all have thoughts on this one.
This might be one of, like, the 10 most beautiful songs ever written. Legitimately, it's such a beautiful, beautiful song. Like, the lyrics are quite abstract, but quite evocative. Like, the way the song... I mean, it's, again, another beautiful orchestration. I love the percussion on this song. I love the evocative lyrics that Brian is singing. I love the title of the song because what people don't realize is the song is called Surf's Up, as in, surf's up, guys. As in, like, the surf is up, the surf is over. That's what the song is about. Like, it's about the Beach Boys transitioning away from their roots and into something more ambitious. And it's both very poignant and very sad in a way because this song took several years to come out, and by the time it actually did come out, Brian was not in a state to finish it, and he really had lost it by then, and Carl had to come in and finish the song. And I personally think, this is different than the version on the Surf's Up album, because the version on Surf's Up has Carl singing the first couple verses, and this version has Brian singing the first couple verses before the child is the father of the man coda. And I think Brian singing this song feels right, because this is from his heart, and it might be the most from Brian's heart song he ever wrote, and that's why it moves me so much. But this top 3 Beach Boys song for me.
Yeah, it is hard to beat. Not even for me, just Beach Boys wise, just as far as it being man, I will say a perfect piece. And this version as well, I'm glad you touched on that. I feel like this one is really the only way to do it, because it's so heartfelt, like you said, but you can just feel this is raw, this is natural, and it's amazing. The laughs come hard in Auld Lang Syne, and I love that thought process here, because I wasn't thinking of it so much as the surf is over, but more so as Surf's Up being a thought of life period. Surf's Up being like, let's get at it, as a way to communicate to somebody else. Like, it's time to really enjoy something. In this case, it being the wave. In the case of being like, surf's up, saying that to your friend. But in here, more so, surf's up as like an excitement for the whole entire trip. And I really enjoy the way that came across in this song. Orchestration is at paramount here. You can listen to the song I have every single time you're going to pick something new, and it's a full-on 412 that for me feels like 8 minutes, and in the best way ever. I fall away into this song every time I listen to it. I really love this song.
Yeah, so I'm leaning more towards Daniel's interpretation of the song because this is one of the saddest songs I've ever heard. It's a beautiful song, don't get me wrong, but this is so relevant because they were the surf band. I mean, the first Beach Boys single is titled Surfin', and that was before even Surfing USA. Like, that was their image. And they were getting more and more progressive, but there still were, in many ways, elements of that happy-go-luckiness in at least their hit songs. Like, we definitely heard some of that in Wouldn't It Be Nice, Good Vibrations. You still get so much of that, but this is like, no, actually, Surf's Up. And it's showing Brian, like, think about it, these boys were college age when they first released music, at the very least. They're a family band, some of them a bit younger. I mean, so Brian's like, what, 23, 24 when he writes this, and he'd been through all of this. He'd seen, like, the best and worst of the machine, so to speak. I mean, unfortunately, he was kind of tossed into it in not the best way. As I said, he didn't get the support of the Fab Four for his vision, I don't believe at all. But this is his song, and it makes sense for him to sing it, even though I think Carl has the best voice out of the group. This is his song, and it very much shows how he was feeling at this point in time. So, in addition to being a beautiful song, it's a fascinating one because it does show this is where he wanted to go. And I also, for me, it's also sad because there's just so much context afterwards, because as we know, it kind of ballooned into being Mike Love's band for worse, because that ended up just being, no, we're going to keep the surf going and play the nostalgia circuit. And that was not where Brian really wanted to go. He wanted to keep it going. He wanted to be ambitious. And this song is a reminder of all of that. But it's a beautiful tune. I completely agree. It's not the first song I love listening to because it's, again, one of the saddest songs I've ever heard. I don't always go for that immediately, but nothing but respect for it, too. It's definitely a beautiful tune. And it's the end of the second movement. Because now we are on to movement 3. Starts with a medley again of I Wanna Be Around and Workshop. I Wanna Be Around is a cover. It was a song written by Johnny Mercer and notably recorded by Tony Bennett with but it's the instrumental version done here, and it's with this Workshop composition of, well, Peace from Brian Wilson, but it ended up being recorded as a single in 1968 of sorts. So, Daniel, how do you feel this starts off this final movement of the album? Because that's really what it's here to do.
I kind of think you need a little break after Surf's Up,
I
and
agree.
that's what this track provides. And again, this album really does need transitional tracks because you have such a serious song in Surf's Up, and you need a bit of relief. So you get a bit of a standard again in here, going with the Americana theme, and also Brian, incorporating another bit of Americana, which is working in the tool shed in the shop, or working in the tool shed at the house. Like, that's something we all can relate to. So I kind of like that it's here, and it gets right into the next section, and the next section kind of flows together in a very cool way all the way to the end. So we'll talk about that.
Yep, my literal notes for this song are I needed this. Because I really did. I needed to relax after such, like, I felt like my hands were clenched with musicality up until this point, and I needed this breath. I have convinced myself that there's a bit of As Time Goes By in the jazz lead into here because that's the way my crazy brain works, and it also makes me feel like it's fitting going into this next thought process, this next movement. I love the Workshop here too, because, and maybe it's after reading and countless listens, but I mean, we're going back into essence of who they are and what they do, and they workshop. I mean, we're listening to a workshop of sorts of music, but hammering and cutting and putting things together. So I really love the way that fits in for me personally as a listener too. This is a neat breath of fresh air and a cool little segue here, or intro if you must, to movement 3.
Yeah, I completely agree that we needed a palate cleanser after Surf's Up. And it's a very cool one, and it does get us into this next section, which again flows together really, really well, and it has definitely the most complete thoughts on the album overall, not counting Heroes and Villains and Surf's Up. Before that, this is really, I think, where the Americana comes in full force. And this, again, with the Workshop sound, I love that portion of it as well, because it's really bringing us into that. So this is a good palate cleanser. We definitely needed it because we are in the home stretch, and it's a really cool one. And really excited to get into the next the next tune especially, because what a fun one. It's vegetables, sometimes with a hyphen in between that word, but not always, with a Al Jardine lead vocal. I want to hear what you guys think first, so let's go.
I think the first thing we have to say is this song is infamous for a featured artist. The featured artist is Paul McCartney chewing on some celery.
Yeah.
Because Paul, at this point had become a huge fan of the Beach Boys and, wanted to get involved somehow. So Paul just chewed celery in the session and it got recorded. But back to the song itself. This is another one that had a lo-fi cousin on Smiley Smile. I again prefer this version because it's the intended version of the song. And I kind of prefer the way that this song flows and how funny this song is. This is one of the funniest songs Brian Wilson's ever wrote. And I think Van Dyke Parks writes some very clever wordplay on this song. And I just love how whimsical and childlike it is. It's almost like the Beach Boys' Yellow Submarine for me, because it's basically a children's song in a great way, and I think, you could sing this to a preschool and they would be very entertained.
I 100% agree because it happened to me. That is a real part of my life. I have always taken it that way, and I through this critical run through of this and reading found a really wild thought process or a thought inside of this, and that was Saturday Evening Post writer Jules Siegel. I'll paraphrase, but long story short, was smoking pot with what he called the Beach Boys marijuana consumption squad, and they had laughed about how in their vegetative state violence couldn't happen, so peace is inside of this vegetative state. And knowing that Brian Wilson had later stated like he wanted to turn everybody into vegetables and have them healthy, organic, it's neat to think that maybe the favorite vegetable here is actually marijuana itself and the happy, beautiful state that it brings across here. Just a wild, different way to think about it. But growing up, it was always that for me. This was a huge part of my childhood, in the fact of like a Sesame Street-esque version of Eat Your Vegetables. But in its own right, such a great tune and such a unique spin on where we were going so far. Especially out of this palate cleanser, we go into a really I'll use the word basic, but with the most respect, song here, in the way that we herald it as it could be a children's song. It's also very basic in its melodies and musicality against what we've heard so far with the orchestration on this album. And I think that's key, not only to coming out of the palate cleanser, but again, how you said the rest of this album melds its way through. This is a really neat jumping off point in this relaxed state, so to speak.
To me, this is an Andy Warhol song, in that I feel like the message of this is similar to what Andy Warhol was putting in his art. It like gives me that vibe of like a Campbell's soup can, and Eat Your Vegetables is very much what this song does for me, and I love it. And this one was a big point of contention in the making of this album, because Brian Wilson wanted it to be the lead single, but Van Dyke Parks did not. He thought it was a weaker effort, and he left the project, and that was a big part of why this album didn't get released. And I gotta agree with Brian, though. I think this is a great song with a lot of layers. We've already discussed it, and it won't make sense. Vegetables, like we're peeling an onion, and there's so much going on in this song, because it's got a message, and it's sharing something, but it's also a great pop song, and that's just what I love to hear, and definitely a favorite Beach Boys song for me. This is a very neat song, and I mean, the way it's done here is hard to beat. Other versions be damned. I'm sticking with this one. I love it.
What else is interesting? Sorry. What else is interesting is this I mean, there's also the part of this album where they go to like "Mom and Dad said," and like that part was released as its own song on the Wild Honey album, and like it feels like that was kind of extricated from the song on the Smiley Smile, and I'm glad that they put it back together on the Sessions version and used an earlier take, because it feels like a more complete thought with that section in it.
I agree with you there. Van Dyke left after this because he thought it was. See, I think, and I did not know that, but I think that's a misconception here. I'm actually sad to hear that, but the misconception of it being too simple. I wasn't trying to call it basic, but I was trying to triumph the simple part of it and how beautiful it is here. It's very sad to hear that Parks felt like it was elementary and jumped out of the project. That's wild.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate too, but it does seem that he came around on it a bit more in later years, which is a good thing, because again, as we said, Smile is a story that did not have an end, which is why we're able to discuss it today, which I'm very grateful for. And next up, we have Holidays, which is an instrumental song. It was rewritten with lyrics for Brian Wilson's version of Smile, but here we get it as an instrumental tune. And it's a neat one. Again, a lot of these very much serve as transitional pieces, but we're in a movement here. And that's where we are. That's the point of this. We're in a movement here. This is not just a song. So so what do we think of Holidays? I usually like songs with that word in the title, holiday. So
And listen, we got Madonna and Green Day doing songs called "Holiday" later, but
yeah.
what I didn't mention with Vegetables, or what we didn't mention with Vegetables, is this section of the album is kind of called the Elements Suite. And Vegetables is the Earth section, and Holidays is a bit of a transitional piece in there, and we'll discuss what the other three elements discussed are. But I kind of like Holidays. Again, it's kind of like the way Child is the Father, the Man leads into Surf's Up. I love the way that Holidays leads into Wind Chimes, with the way that you've got the marimba incorporated and the very strong percussive elements of the song. I think it's the coolest percussion part of the album, both on Holidays and Wind Chimes, and I like the ambiance of it, and also like I think a percussive element like a marimba does evoke like a breeze. Like a breeze while you're on a holiday, and then leading into a song like Wind Chimes, I think that's perfect. And it goes to how this album really could have been flowed together in the way it's constructed. It just was never able to be finished. But I think it's pretty immaculate the way they were able to construct the flow here in how that transition occurs.
I feel like you stole my notes. But in such a great way, because I'm glad to hear what I think is my craziness sometimes. But it really is such a beautiful, we didn't touch on the elements. And I was getting there here, but it's such a beautiful piece because that is it. One, I get that long marimba, and you could give me marimba for days and I'd be happy. But I'm always with the transitional feeling of this, with like a wind thought into wind chimes, and you get it so much. Maybe it's the way my animated brain works, but like when I'm listening to this come out of Vegetables, it's almost like I see this side scrolling transition throughout some, almost invoking like some Yellow Submarine animation, but like, going into wind chimes, and it works so beautiful. It's such a neat piece. I listen to it nonstop again, because I love the marimba here, but it's such a neat palate cleanser. Very rarely have we done albums where we're like, oh, here's another palate cleanser, but it's so needed, these transitional pieces, and especially this one invoking this I like the word breeze, this breeze into wind chimes.
Yeah, completely with you there. And now we're on to Wind Chimes. I mean, kind of crazy. I don't know if anybody thought of doing this before that, but it's kind of crazy that they didn't. But someone had to be the first, because they've got a musical sound to them, wind chimes, all by itself. So of course we should make a song out of it. That's just perfect. So, Daniel, what are your thoughts on wind chimes?
We did bring up earlier that Carl Wilson's an impeccable vocalist, and this, in my opinion, is one of the greatest vocal performances he's ever done. This version of the song. There is another version of the song on Smiley Smile, again, more lo-fi, incorporates a bit of the marimba part from Holidays, but again, I think the way this version builds up and the way you get that hit into that orchestration, it really impacts you. I think this song just, like, I mean, it evokes wind in a great way, and I think, like, Carl's got a very breezy, as I said before, vocal, and, like, it's so light to touch, and it's so pretty, and again, the percussion is incredible, and I just love... this song has my favorite soundscape on the album, I would say. The sounds on this song are so beautiful, and so rarely evoked in a rock sense, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd say almost never, if ever. But it's beautiful. It really is. It is it carries seamlessly from where we were, not to beat a dead horse, but then rolls in to our next element perfectly. This song is such a great example, in my opinion, of this beautifully done crescendo piece. And right here, going into our next element, spoiler alert, fire, we get this crescendo from wind to fire, and it's so beautifully done, and so delicate, like you said. It really is. It's a delicate walk into chaos in this piece, and I love it. I guess in hindsight, we could say all these are like transition pieces, the way that it flows, and we sort of did. But this one really is a great example of a beautiful musical crescendo in song form.
Yeah, that it is. Yeah, never mad to hear Carl singing, because especially since this is so much Brian Wilson's baby, and I do think that's another key point here, how this album, as we heard it in 2011, is not how we would have gotten it back then. I mean, I know that they say, oh, well, Brian was the band, we were just the mouthpieces, but that, I've seen that quote before, but that just really underplays the contributions of his brothers in particular. Because I do imagine that if we did get this mythical lost album, there would have been more vocals from them, especially Carl. But I'm glad that I'm really always happy to hear what we've gotten here. And, yeah, another beautiful track. I can say that about all of these, but it is what it is, And now we are into fire, another element. It's the elements fire, parentheses, Mrs. O'Leary's cow. A lot interesting title, but now let's talk about the song itself. I'll let Daniel start.
So, if anyone doesn't get the Mrs. O'Leary's cow reference, that relates to the Great Chicago Fire, which apparently was started by a cow kicking something and leading into the fire that burned down the city of Chicago in the late 1800s. And this song is a very interesting history. This song kind of caused Brian Wilson's mental breakdown. If you know the history, Brian recorded this song, and then there were wildfires in California, and he thought he had telekinesis abilities and caused them, and that kind of led to a bit of his schizoaffective disorder and hearing voices, and you can kind of hear that in the song, too. This song is kind of chaos in musical form, and it sounds like a fire truck is coming in and, like, putting out a fire, and, like, it almost feels like a fire tornado at one point when you're getting, like, the big percussive part of it, and you're getting the crazy vocals in there. Like, you can kind of see why this song would drive someone crazy, this is one of the more unique songs in the Beach Boys catalog, just because it almost feels like, to use a more musical term, musique concrète, which is a sound collage and doesn't always use like instrumental elements, but also like there's obviously like whistles and like fire truck sounds and other things in there. But I think it's a really cool track, and it's unfortunate that Brian had such severe mental problems that arose from it.
Yeah. It is controlled chaos in a musical format, and I love it for that. I was talking about the crescendo into chaos here, but I mean, it's full on chaos. It's wild that you said tornado too, because that's the first thing I think of with the chromatic up and downs in the beginning of the song. The do 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 do, almost invoking, as crazy as it sounds now that we were talking about before, but invoking thoughts of the Twister in The Wizard of Oz. And then we get into this full on chaos inside of the interpretation of the Chicago Fire, which is wild. It hot tea take. The beginning of this is so in contrast to everything else that it takes me out for a split second. But that's what chaos will do to you in hindsight listening. You know, it's going to jar you and take you out a little bit. I say take you out, not in the negative sense that we usually run that with, but it is this controlled chaos throughout, and I'm going to beat this dead horse till we get there. It transitions so well into where this album goes. It's such a unique piece here.
Yeah. These mentions of the Wizard of Oz just get my brain rolling. It's like I can't help but hope that Brian Wilson and Judy Garland met. There's no evidence that they did, but that would have been wild if they did. But that's just my brain going into different places. Yeah, this song is definitely controlled chaos. Maybe a little too chaotic for me, but I do respect what it is. And I do like the historic references with the Chicago Fire. I think that's really neat, and it lends itself perfectly to this album's concept. Because let's be clear, this is a concept album, and that's a big piece of Americana right there, is the Great Chicago Fire. So pretty neat that we've got that going on. But yes, now we are on to Love to Say Dada, one of the most unique titles we've ever come across in the over 100 episodes we've done Turntables and Take. Daniel, what do you think of this song?
This is another song with an interesting history, because this version is very obviously a little incomplete. You hear the completed version of this song on the album Sunflower with its closing track, Cool Cool Water, which is more lyrical and more evocative, but you do get the sense that this is evoking water. And then also on Brian Wilson's Smile, you have this with lyrics in the form of a song called In Blue Hawaii. But this version is almost just like evoking, like, sitting by the river and watching it flow by, is what I would say. And I think, again, it's a very cool transition into the last part of the album. And I mean, well, the final song on the album specifically. But I do have to say I probably prefer Cool Cool Water just because it's a completed song. But it is cool to have on this album, even in the incomplete form.
Yeah, I'm with you. I enjoy this here. I really do, and I respect it. When I put the spin of it and I feel the water. I don't want to take that away either. I do. I feel the water here. I enjoy that. I will take and put the spin of it possibly being like a Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds kind of reference to LSD, and feel that real wavy sense inside of it that ends up with this almost like God moment with this final harmony before we go into the last track. And I respect it a lot for that. There is a tiny bit, like when I re-listen now, again, knowing that it's really like an unfinished form, re-listen, there's just a tad missing for me some way inside of it. And I'm always down with the avant-garde. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from this because I enjoy it inside of this album, but just critically, there's something small missing, and maybe that's just the incomplete version here. But such a cool piece in this penultimate spot.
Yeah, I can tell this was an unfinished track, and there was a desire to hear these unfinished tracks, don't get me wrong, so it does make sense that it's here. There was a desire for it in terms of the album. I get that this is as close as we'll get to what it would have been. I can't say I see it on that, especially since it did get finished properly later. So this is, if I'm gonna, we say this, gun to the head song. Might be insane for me to do that for the Beach Boys' Smile, but this is it for me, I'm afraid. And it's just because it's unfinished. That's really kind of what it boils down to.
Yeah, if we had a gun to the head to do gun to the head right now, I'd pick this as well. But we don't need to. But yeah, I feel exactly where you're at. It ends up being gun to the head here, mostly because of the unfinishedness. It's just, for me, I can't escape it, and that's what does it for me. Even after listen after listen after listen, and ultimately, it's because it is indeed unfinished.
Yep, but
I do think the coolest part is the lead-in, which Charlie transition.
Yeah, it is, and it's pretty funny that we're going from an unfinished song to the most finished song of them all. You know it, you love it. It's the iconic, legendary Good Vibrations, the most expensive song ever recorded up to this point in time, but a pop classic. I mean, Good Vibrations. We're gonna try and add our pieces to this one. I'm gonna start with our Beach Boys expert here. Take it away.
I mean, this is the first Beach Boys song I ever knew, because it was track 1 on their greatest hits. So, like, it's their biggest hit. It's their signature song. I mean, it was the song that started this album process, because Brian, after Pet Sounds, was like, I want to write a little pocket symphony. And that's what he called Good Vibrations while he was writing it. And he invented a style that I mentioned earlier called modular recording, which basically meant that he would record different parts of the song in different studios until he got the right sounds and piece it together. Like, almost like, a modular puzzle. And the way this song apparently had like 9 hours of recording at least, and like was edited down from 30 finished minutes of music, which is crazy to think about. And then the version we have on this album is even different than the single form, because we've got a bit of a new part, an extended part of a section here, which I actually think adds to the song. And it's so cool to like Heroes and Villains. It's got so many movements to it. It's got so many layers to it. The cello part in this song is eternal for a reason. It's and also the theremin part on this song is eternal for a reason. Like, the theremin is such a cool addition to this. Like again, nothing before or since had really been used on a pop song in that way. And I mean, again, this is a Carl vocal, and Carl really delicately sings it, and also one of Mike Love's best vocals on the chorus. And we really haven't talked much about Mike Love on here because, I mean, as is commonly known, Mike was not the biggest fan of this direction for the band. He was much more of the frontman in the Cars and Surfing era, and he liked the money he made from it so much he went back to it later on. So,
Yep.
but like, I think like this song is probably Mike Love's greatest moment as a Beach Boy. So I wanted to give Mike his positive shout out there. I mean, there's not much else that needs to be said. This is a perfect song. Like, it's their signature song for good reason.
No, I'm 100% with you on their signature song. A perfect song. I don't care how many times you had to record it. I have nothing but love for it that way. It's ingrained in pop culture, in Americana culture, which is really where I'm going here, because at first it's just good to have good vibrations at the end of this album, my first listen. But going over and really diving into this, it for me is such a fitting end for this whole entire album, because that's really what this album has been, ultimately for me as a listener, is these awesome vibrations, these really great orchestrations and wild sounds. And it took me a second to take myself out of what I knew Good Vibrations as and treat it as a finale to this album. But when I did, it took on a whole new life, of this perfect bow to this really awesome album, and especially this third movement. Um, yeah, it could be a whole podcast talking about the production, and you did such a great job summarizing it that I won't even touch on the intricacies there. But really, as a finale to this album and movement, it's phenomenal. It's perfect in that right as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there probably is a podcast all about Good Vibrations out there. I'm sure there
Heard,
is. But
heard.
I have to diverge a bit. I don't like this version as much as the single version, but I understand wanting to switch it up for the album. But I do think, again, it was pretty perfectly done the first time around. And it's very key to the making of this album because he wanted to go up from here. And I think that's part of like so much of the issue. It's like, how do you top this pocket symphony that was so ambitious that could have failed spectacularly? It on paper could have easily been a disaster, and it's far from it. It is a perfect pop song, and even though as complex as it is, this is still a fun song that you can do at karaoke. And I did see the current Mike Love incarnation of the Beach Boys last year at the Ocean's Calling Festival, and he honestly looked like he was gonna keel over. He didn't do much actual singing because he's over 80, but all that snarkiness aside, it was pretty magical hearing this song live, even if it wasn't the real Beach Boys, because it's Good Vibrations, and it's a perfect song. I mean, there's nothing else to add to it. And I think it's a perfect album closer. But I know, Daniel, you told me that you think of You're Welcome as part of the album. Can you
You really
expand on
did.
that?
You really did steal my notes. That was like, this is the linchpin for my final summarization of this
Oh
album.
no.
So I'm glad to hear that. No, I love it. I love it.
Before we go into Your Welcome, I do want to bring up that Good Vibrations has a resurgence because Queen Bee herself, Beyonce, sampled it in the song Ya Ya on Cowboy Carter.
She
And
did.
I think that was a really cool nod because Beyonce is our probably biggest pop historian working today. And I think that her giving a nod on her Americana album to the Beach Boys is really, really cool. And I just saw her do Ya Ya live in concert on July 4th, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's wild.
If you want to hear more about Cowboy Carter, we do have an episode on it. So if you're listening, check it out. That was it was done at the time it was released, but I think a lot of what we said is still accurate at the time, because she is definitely pop's biggest historian. I don't think that's a stretch at all.
And I wonder if I even knew that.
Yes,
I don't think
it definitely came up in our discussion. I know all these things run together, but it definitely came up.
Heard that. That's awesome.
But back to Your Welcome. I kind of consider Your Welcome this album's Her Majesty, to reference the Beatles again. It's a nice little tag, and it's kind of, like it was actually the B-side of Heroes and Villains back in the day. So I think because it was the B-side of Heroes and Villains, and because it was canonically part of the sessions, and it's not really featured anywhere else, I kind of consider it part of the album. And like, it's a nice little coda. Like, you get like You get them. You get basically like Brian and the Beach Boys saying, you sat through all this, and you're welcome. We gave you something special, and here it is.
100%, 100% exactly what it is. I'm surprised it's not considered the final track of this album. I really am. I'm glad to hear that that's at least somebody else's opinion too. It just fits so well.
It's not my
really
opinion,
does.
but I respect both of your opinions.
I heard that.
We're gonna say that. And now, woo, what a ride. Smile, our first ever Beach Boys episode. I've had people come up to me, you need to do the Beach Boys, but when you tell me that, I'm like, okay, what album do you want to hear? That you can't just give me an artist, especially one with as many albums. But I'm very glad that Daniel reached out to me to mention doing the Beach Boys, and we decided to take on this wild ride. And this is our longest podcast ever, but I'm very happy with how this discussion turned out, because I don't think any of it was wasted. So thank you, Daniel, for returning to us. I think if you're back, it might have to be for the Beach Boys, because you are a wealth of knowledge about the Beach Boys, my friend.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I mentioned this, but I really love their 1970 album Sunflower, and I think it doesn't get enough shine. So that's the one I would come back and discuss in a heartbeat.
Well, there.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, sounds good to me too. Because there's so much to discuss with these Wild Boys. But now, well, I'll start with Daniel, but we're all going to. I think we're all probably on a similar page as to how we would grade this album, but I'll start with our Beach Boys head.
So, to me, the Beach Boys have one A-plus album, and that is Pet Sounds. Personally. This is a very high A. And the reason it's a very high A and not an A+ is because it was never completed. And that's not a knock against the music itself, it's just a knock against the way it was constructed. It just never got finished. But for what it is, it's an A. Fully.
Yeah, man. Beach Boys Smile Sessions. I found my new favorite 3-act play in the sense. I really did. I these 3 movements are amazing, and then you get this walkout, the end of this wild, beautiful 3-act play, and you get a walkout music of You're Welcome. It's really encapsulated in such a beautiful package. There's again, I go back to what I said about the blindfolded listener. This album is so complete, and so with a nod to it not ultimately being finished, but it's such a beautiful, complete entity. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed diving into it, and I thoroughly recommend, if you never sat down with it, please do. For me, it is an A+, because it moved me in so many different ways, even in a critical standpoint. So I mulled that around, but I am giving this the highly coveted A+ on Turntables and Tea.
Yeah, we don't have too many that we've given A+s to. I'm with Daniel, it's a high A, but the fact that it did get one is good. And occasionally there's a bit of a divergence, which is always fun. And now, I know what mine will be, but what are each of us favorite songs on the album? Go.
I'm gonna say the best song on here is Surf's Up, but my favorite is Heroes and Villains.
I'm going to go for the one that I jumped ahead for and missed my critique of Look because I wanted to talk about it twice. Child is the Father of Man is my piece on this. I love it.
We all have a different favorite song. Mine is Vegetables. I don't even want to count Good Vibrations because that's such an iconic single in its own right that I feel like we need to give shine to the rest of these songs. And that is the one that spoke to me. That's my Andy Warhol piece. So
I love it.
There we have it. And now we're at the bitter end of Smile. Daniel, thanks again for joining us. If you want to keep up with us, follow us on social media. Links are in the description. And also subscribe. Leave us a nice rating or review. It would be much appreciated. And I do know what we're doing next, actually, because I was lucky enough to score tickets to Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun farewell tour. At the time we're recording this, it's in a few days. I'm super excited because I've missed out on seeing her a couple of times, and I'm finally getting the chance to. So, with that being said, we're going to be diving into a pop classic, one of the most iconic debuts of all time. She's So Unusual. You know it, you love it. I can't wait to do it. So,
yeah, man.
Until then, the girls have some fun, but turntables and tea will be smiling with you time after time.
Peace.